Hi, I'm your host, Pragmatic, and here's my assistant host, Wittgenstein, and welcome to the Lion Ghost Show, a live show on BlogTV that airs on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Lion Ghost Show aims to promote discussion in order to obtain understanding. As a fair warning to potential callers, the show is live and will be posted on our YouTube channel that holds the same name, The Lion Ghost Show. Today's topic will be centered around faith. What exactly is faith? Who holds to faith? How is faith developed? And, of course, how is faith discarded? So let's begin this show off with the first question. What exactly is faith? According to dictionary.com, faith is 1. Confidence or trust in a person or thing. 2. Belief that is not based on proof. 3. Belief in God or in the doctrines or teachings of religion. 4. Belief in anything such as a code of ethics, standard of merit, etc. 5. A system of religious belief. While we don't hold these definitions as the absolute meaning of the word, it is interesting to note that belief is located in 4 of the 5 definitions. And Wittgenstein, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hello all. Yes, I'm Wittgenstein. You can just call me Wit for the sake of simplicity. And just to pick up a little bit where you just left off, I would want to stress, although I would agree that perhaps 100% of the time I've ever heard somebody use the word faith, it does center around belief, as you just said. However, I would also stress that, words are just symbols, and their meanings actually derive from however people use them. So I think the essential fallacy many people obviously run into, not least among them atheists, is to think of a word as having some intrinsic meaning, and there is only, to try to discover what the actual meaning of some word is. And so really, when you're talking with someone, the point is to find out what they mean by it. And so.
Exactly, within the context, which actually I've noticed a lot of atheists, at least in some of the forums that I visit, do make this assumption whenever someone mentions faith, and they tend to be incorrect upon their assumptions of how that person is using it. And usually until that correction is made, there's a lot of confusion within the topic. So, it's a very good point.
And again, correct or incorrect really refers to whether or not it corresponds to how somebody's using it. So if you're attacking somebody's faith, and the way they define faith is utterly different than how you're attacking it, you're not attacking their faith. You're attacking some straw man that you've concocted. And, as an atheist myself, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, when you just hear it repeated like a mantra, that faith is, just forget all other definitions, forget all other uses, forget how people mean the word when they say it. It just absolutely is, how, usually they say it's belief despite the evidence, or belief without evidence. Perhaps for some people, but definitely not for all. So.
Yeah, and as I was mentioning to you earlier, Buddhism has an interesting take on what faith is. Now, I'm probably going to really butcher this word, but they have a word, siddha, or siddhaha, which is essentially faith. And they believe it to contain these 3 things: a conviction that something is. The second is a determination to accomplish one's goal. And the third is a sense of joy deriving from the other 2. And actually what I thought was interesting on the Buddhist take on it was their second one, a determination to accomplish one's goals, which goes into what you were talking about with context. When they're talking about faith, it might be interesting to ask what the goal of their faith is, or if they even considered that. Because ultimately, everyone, when they believe in something, at least, there's a reason. And I remember in one of the forum discussions I was in, I had to mention the fact that people are usually compelled, or actually always compelled, to their faith or beliefs. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm just suddenly going to believe in this," and be honest about it.
And not to beat a dead horse, but again, when you say context, I mean, I think that's the essential takeaway real message. And, to throw a piece of Wittgensteinian jargon out there, it's the way he referred to it was language games. So you would say, with that piece of jargon, you would say the meaning of the word faith depends on the language game in which it's played, so to speak. And so, and forget about how individual people define words. Even within a single individual, we tend to use words throughout the day in multiple different ways. I may use the word faith in 5 different ways throughout the same day, let alone, other people and how they use the word. So, yeah, it's all about context. It's all about use. And
one of our viewers posed an interesting point, that faith does usually imply without evidence. But I like to stress that many times this is inaccurately explained by what they mean without evidence. Because sometimes someone would consider an authority to be evidence of, or to be, evidence towards trust. They've established that that authority is trustworthy and that the topic is relevant to that authority. So if the authority agrees with it or explains it, then maybe it's trustworthy to hold true for now and maybe investigate later. Like a doctor. If a doctor starts telling you about certain medications and their after effects, you would have some form of, or you'd use some form of faith, maybe not blind faith, because you have, a good reason, but it is sort of a form of faith to trust him.
Oh,
and
yeah,
for good reasons.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, just the case of when you go to the doctor. I mean, yeah, there's a fair amount of good reason to place trust in him. But let's say you go to a brand new doctor, you really don't know much about him. He prescribes you medicine. I mean, in much the same way, I would call that faith. I mean, there's plenty of things, even as an atheist, I think it's fair to say we have faith about. But again, that's not to say, again, remember the central point, that faith doesn't have the singular definition. Certainly not. It doesn't certainly only mean, belief without evidence, as somebody in the chat just said. And so I'm not saying, when I say atheists have faith, I'm not saying that we have beliefs without evidence. Although I'm not.
Some of us do.
I'm not saying that either. I mean, I think I do still. I would also say certainly that there is probably many beliefs everybody has that aren't completely grounded in, unshakable evidence, or perhaps no evidence whatsoever. I mean, yeah.
Good faith versus bad faith. Yeah, good point, Redline. So yeah, that's a good one to go into, actually. What is good faith versus bad faith? I do like the idea that with the Buddhists, if your faith is intended or has aspects that can help you towards a goal, whatever that goal is, I consider that, as a sign that it's more leaning towards good faith. Whereas if the faith is based upon simply something that's going to control what you do, that might be considered more bad faith, because that's limiting your, free will, if you want to call it that, your ability to think rationally. In a previous discussion, in a previous show actually, we talked of absolutes and the dangers of absolutes. And of course the differences between axiomic and, a theoretical absolute, or theory. I can't remember what exactly they call them, but axiomic absolutes obviously are fine. That's mathematics or most systems of logic.
Axiomatic? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Axiomatic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
But to say that you're going to consider everything in the Bible to be absolutely true may be suspect to caution, because while that statement alone doesn't really describe what they mean by absolutely true, it does show that this Bible may be prone to make decisions, really strong ones, in their lives without them really giving the chance to judge it for themselves. And of course, in our last show, we went into schizophrenia a little, and the idea that schizophrenia is basically being unable to distinguish a delusion from reality. So, in a way, can one use absolutes to cause sort of schizophrenic ways of thinking or behaving? Hey, Devin.
Hey, what's up?
How are you doing today?
Good. I have a question for you guys, since you guys are talking about the question of faith. If you're saying that faith can be different things for different people, and you have one claim, and it is a claim that is without evidence, is faith different for anybody? Isn't it always a belief without evidence?
Oh, of
That's
course
an interesting
not.
question.
Of course
Because, well, the interesting part of this is by evidence, are you talking that which can just be personally convincing, or that which is intended to convince others?
Well, wait a minute. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was only taking one sense of the word evidence, which is empirical evidence, considering that your senses can deceive you, of course.
Let me ask if you can rephrase the question, because I think that was really clumsily
what I'm
asked.
saying is if you have a claim that's without evidence,
Sure.
like let's say, even if it's not, let's say I think we would all agree that Christianity is a claim without evidence, right? Without any evidence that would convince anyone.
Empirical evidence? Yeah.
I think personal evidence still isn't like any kind of empirical evidence, because it could be better explained by natural phenomena, which would be...
that's just an example, though. But for the sake of your question, let's just say yes. Although I don't.
Yeah.
But I want to see what you're asking.
Okay, well, what I'm asking is, isn't all faith belief without evidence for that claim? If that claim is without evidence.
If that's what you mean by faith. It depends on what you mean by faith.
No,
if that's what you mean by faith, then yeah.
If I say I have faith in, let's just say something that doesn't exist, like an invisible pink unicorn, and my term of faith is evidence, I believe that faith is evidence that backs your claim.
Okay.
But there is no evidence to back my claim.
Then it's not faith.
Isn't faith in this situation for all people, whether you define it as just believing for no reason or believing with evidence?
No. Look, it's really straightforward. You just said if you define faith as something with evidence, and I say I have faith for a pink unicorn, then it logically follows from that. Then there must be evidence for this pink unicorn. If there's not evidence for that pink unicorn, then as you just defined faith, that's not faith.
No, but there's Christians who believe that believe that faith is evidence, evidence that reinforces or substantiates your belief. Sure. But there is no evidence to substantiate that belief. So isn't all faith in that?
But they believe it. They believe there is. They believe there is evidence. That's the thing.
I think I can clear this up a little. There's a small bit of muddling here, and the muddling is caused by the fact that you gotta ask them, well, when they say their faith, we're obviously talking about their religious beliefs, or I know some people don't like that word religion, but I'm going to put it that way anyways. Their religious beliefs. And okay, now I'm getting feedback. But anyways,
sorry about that. That was me.
That's okay. So you got to first ask, or try to figure out what exactly this religious belief might be stemming from. Could it be a personal sort of aspect? And so, okay, yeah, I'll mute my mic next time. Anyways, so what was it? Okay, yeah. So where's it coming from? Could it be they're expressing something internal with them, or could they had some personal experience? All those things are technically evidence that led them towards their faith. One of the important aspects and reasons why I brought up belief is not something you can just suddenly do. You have to be compelled into it. You can't just say, oh, well, today I'm going to believe the world is made of lava, and then suddenly start screaming in pain and hollering because you think the world is made of lava. You can't do that. You can pretend, but that's not the same.
I think that there's good evidence and there's bad evidence, and what you deem good evidence and bad evidence would be different in every situation, right? I could say, oh, I feel like there's a God, but there's no evidence to substantiate that claim. And shouldn't we require evidence for claims?
Oh, of course, when it's presented as one. But if one just states, hey, I believe this, this, and this, it would be more appropriate to ask them, oh, well, why do you believe that? Rather than saying, I demand evidence. Yeah, that's more of a statement of understanding. They presented something personal about themselves so you can better understand them. When presented as a claim, obviously they'll need to provide the evidence. If they state it as a statement of fact, instead of saying, I believe that, God exists, they'll say, God exists.
But let me point something out, though. Let me just point out the fact that the conversation has already shifted away from the question of faith and now into whether or not your evidence holds water. So to the original point, most Christians anyways, I don't even want to say most, but a lot of them, when conversing with them, or at least the ones that do say, right, faith is belief with evidence, or faith, is evidence of the things unseen. They quote the Bible, and they say, so it is based in evidence, and then they say, okay, well, so I do have evidence for my beliefs. Now, at that point, we're already moving on. So at that point, I think it's good to acknowledge that point and say, okay, so we're no longer arguing about whether or not faith is belief without evidence. At this point, it is belief with evidence.
I sure hope you have
to them, and that's all that matters. What matters is how they're using it, and if that's how they're using it, then that's what it is to them. So then we move on to the next point. Okay, let's investigate your evidence. Is it good or bad? So that's a second-tier point. I just wanted to...
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
okay.
So...
Well, then, could we say that there's something universal that stands as good evidence for why anyone would believe something?
Well, you got to ask yourself, is it convincing to that particular person?
Now, and you are willing to say that anecdotal evidence is enough to stand as evidence, because you were saying earlier that there's
For an individual. Now, if you're trying to make a case that you would hope would attract the most people, you might want to avoid esoteric sort of evidence and more go towards evidence that pretty much anyone can confirm, and stay out of people's personal preferences.
Well, look at the case of schizophrenia that you mentioned earlier. If it's schizophrenic, and I actually know someone actually fairly close to me, so I'm not just making this up, he's actually had, so he claims, experiences with angels and demons and hearing the voice of God. So to him, that is pretty good evidence when it comes to him. But as far as, as I think Prag just said, as far as trying to convince someone else, it's pretty weak. That's just personal experience.
But the problem is with that evidence is it's not good evidence at all because of the fact we can explain it with other means besides it being supernatural. We can say, hey, this is what your brain's doing. Too much dopamine is in your system and it's causing your brain to be overloaded and cause hallucinations. And that's a much better explanation with empirical evidence to back it than saying, oh, well, that's enough evidence for me to believe in a God.
That doesn't necessarily negate his claim, though. All you've really done is describe the mechanics.
Again, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is simply to prove something, well, good luck in that, attempt. But if you're just wanting to convince some particular person, which in a way you could say prove it to them, then there is certain things that they'll state that as evidence that's really weak, and you would want to address those particular weak bits of evidence because they're probably wanting, this is a big assumption here, they're probably wanting to know if that evidence is trustworthy or not.
Well, the thing is with that Wittgensteinian, I always want to call him Wittgenstein, is the fact that...
Just call me Wit. Just call me Wit. It's
okay,
easier.
I'll call you Wit. All right. The problem with that is that is it more likely? It's more of an inductive argument than a deductive argument. Is it more likely that this person is just hallucinating, considering the fact that it's all naturally occurring and we can explain it, and every schizophrenic person isn't alike. They all have different, and they're also the minority, which we kind of do have to go off of an argumentum ad populum, assuming that the authority is correct, or the majority is correct. So is it more likely that that person is just hallucinating and seeing something that's not real, or is it less likely?
I mean, again, I guess that it really all depends on what's your criteria for likelihood. If your criteria for likelihood is that you can find similar cases and say, oh, well, then because there's other cases, perhaps not identical, but very similar, that therefore they're similarly caused by the same thing. Or, I mean, again, though, even if you could completely explain the fact that it's how it's all happening naturally, it doesn't seem to negate the idea that perhaps that's the medium through which God gives you the message.
Yeah, I know that much. But what I'm saying is, if you've got a small minority subset of people that have schizophrenia, and then of those people, all of their hallucinations are different and mostly not similar. Because I know personally a schizophrenic person, and their schizophrenia differs from every other person. They still hear voices, but they think that someone's telling them to go kill their grandmother. And and as soon as you put them on a pill, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, they no longer have those effects.
Those symptoms, yeah. I'm going to invite a guy into the show. His name is, he's known as Sweet Oblivion. I don't know his actual name. So, see if we can get him. Yeah, let's see if we can connect him. Redline. Hello. There we go. Awesome. You there, Sweets?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, cool. Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, my YouTube channel is Honest Techno Atheist, and this is my second time being on this show.
And you said you were interested in something?
I had an idea for a show topic, strong atheism versus weak atheism.
Oh, not this again.
If anyone's interested, if not, it doesn't really matter.
Well, let me ask you a question. Which are you?
I'm a strong atheist.
Okay, I would say I am too, but also it doesn't really depend on what God you're talking about too. I mean, I'm a strong atheist for certain gods and a weak for others, and
wait, I thought a strong
how can you really be a...
Yeah, I thought a strong atheist was just a person who said that there is no gods, rather than I don't believe that there is any gods.
I claim that no gods exist of any kind.
So how would you address the pantheism view?
Pantheism is that God is the universe. Well, if you want to, you can call anything God, and then I can call a chicken parmesan dinner God, and that God exists.
Well, what about a deistic God though? I mean, somebody indifferent.
No gods of any kind.
Or what about a malevolent
I define
God?
gods. What kind of God?
A malevolent God.
Yeah, no gods. None like that. I define gods as a being with magical powers, or supernatural powers, or whatever.
Well,
I see. So within the naturalistic viewpoint, the idea that because it is not within nature, it cannot be known. And therefore, why even make the assumption that it even exists?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe I should be more specific, because I guess a wizard could have powers, and he wouldn't be a god. He'd just be magical.
Well,
how are you sure that the natural world is all that exists?
Well, that's all we really currently can observe.
Well, of course, that's all we can currently observe, but what if the supernatural is outside of observation?
Well, as I said before, usually in naturalism, they say, why even make the assumption that there is more out there until we have the ability to even gather knowledge of it?
But what if you can't gather knowledge of something outside of natural? I mean, we can't gather evidence on something that's outside of the natural world, can we?
Look at it this way. I think this is a helpful way to think about it. I'm reminded of what Arthur C. Clarke's definition of magic, which was any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So perhaps what we're calling magic or supernatural is just something so incredibly advanced that to us it's magic, so to speak. And I think you could equally rephrase that in terms of a god to say any sufficiently advanced being is indistinguishable from a god. So perhaps God really is nothing more than just some sufficiently advanced alien or being, that perhaps resides in the multiverse or something.
As I was saying the other night, I define a God as being supernatural, and then I define supernatural
But
as...
but according to what I just said, that's what supernatural is. It's just something sufficiently advanced that it's beyond our understanding of the natural. So it would still technically be natural. Supernatural would just be a very advanced form of the natural. But it would still be within the umbrella of nature.
I guess maybe.
I mean, nature is just a synonym for existence. I mean, essentially, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of technical.
This is what I understood from what he said yesterday. Any God that is supernatural, that's outside of space and outside of time, then what is it and where is it and how does it exist, right?
Yeah, that's one
Okay, and this is what I was saying. We are all starting from the presupposition that our five senses are correct. And from that presupposition that our five senses are correct and have authority, we create a language, and then all of these words mean things. And what I'm saying is that it is possible, there's tons of different ways you could think of it, but this is the one that I like to say. It's possible that you're a brain in a vat, and in that vat in which you reside, and in that alternate reality, a God actually does exist. So that's just one case right there that it's possible that a God actually does exist.
Well, I don't use my five senses to say that a God wouldn't exist outside of space and time because you can't observe that. I use, logic. I mean, where is it and when is it? There's nowhere and no when it can possibly be.
And the point is,
I'm going to address this. Hold on a second. I want to address it in this sort of aspect. When you think of knowledge, and yeah, exactly. But anyways, since the viewers can't see what you're writing. By the way, Wittgenstein loves the topic of solipsism. So, this is going to pique his interest. Anyways, you think of knowledge. One way you can put it is knowledge is really only necessary when it or even means anything if it serves a purpose, and its main purpose is to help us in life, to push us forward in life, allow us to do things, and to understand in order to continue pushing forward in life. So if you put it in that sort of aspect, you got to ask yourself, okay, if I'm a brain in a vat and my experiences and everything are within this machine, then all that really matters is my presence in that machine. And the information I'm gathering is so I can function within that machine correctly. So it really doesn't matter if this could be a machine or not. That would be irrelevant to me. What matters is the moment right now. What is my distraction, that goal I have in mind from what could ultimately be a pointless, meaningless life? And that goal in mind is all I care about right now. Whether it's real or not is irrelevant to me. I'll deal with that when it comes about.
Yeah. That's what I was saying to him, that the fact that it wouldn't change anything if we did know. But that's not what we're saying, that we're talking about something supernatural existing. So if we are coming from the presupposition that our senses and everything are correct, and that helps us out in this world. There's no doubt about it. And if we're coming from the presupposition that our senses and everything are correct, then a God that exists and manifests in reality obviously doesn't exist. But when we don't come from that presupposition that our senses and everything are correct, because there is a possibility that they are wrong, or that our phenomenological data is different from the raw data out there in the world, even that much. And that much we actually do know, that the brain does...
no, we don't.
We do. We do.
No, we don't.
Yeah, we do. We do know that the brain...
I'm guessing he's saying...
Yeah, how could you possibly know that?
How can I know?
I think he's going by verification, which basically states that we at least have models that have shown to be predictable that support that.
That's not what I was saying. I was saying that there are illusions that the brain has on us. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that even sight, a lot of things in sight, there are illusions, and the brain constructs a lot of things that aren't actually there. But
in order to really say that, you have to know, quote unquote, what's there absent your mind's eye or absent your sight, in order to be able to compare it to what you're seeing, which you can't do. Or in other words, I feel like I didn't say that very well. In order to call something an illusion, You have to know the other side of it. But since all you ever know is what you see, that's all you can ever speak about. There's no, it's meaningless to call that an illusion.
No, when there's multiple verification, we know that there are illusions. You can't say, oh, we don't know that these.
What do you mean multiple? What do you mean by multiple verifications?
Okay, well, when we have different people that also have senses, that
how do you know that?
Okay,
you're already
that's also a presupposition. But I'm saying with we already come from the presupposition.
If you're already talking about other people and their senses, then you've already accomplished your goal. There's no reason to use that
you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. I'm saying if we already assume that our senses are correct, right? We already got that passed. We know that our brain creates a lot of I'm just talking about what we see. What we see, a lot of it is constructed by our brain. And we know this through neuroscience. We know that there are a lot of illusions that vision is. There's a lot of illusions. We know this.
I actually have an example, and I'm going to see if we can get that example up, of a checkerboard, and it has figures A and B labeled on the checkerboard. And on the checkerboard is a giant green cylinder. The cylinder is casting a shadow across the checkerboard, which in turn changes the shades of the colors in it. To the average eye, I'm not sure if the image is up, I think it will be soon. To the average eye, A and B are completely different. But if you take B out of its context and take A out of its context and put them side by side, they are actually the exact same color. And that illusion is an example of our eyes deceiving us. And that is, in a sense, verifiable, or in verification sense, that is evidence towards the presumption that our senses can fail us. And there are plenty of illusions out there to demonstrate.
You have to use your senses to do that.
Oh, we're not saying our senses are useless. You must have trust in your senses. Just know that when the or if a contradiction pops up, to consider it and to say, maybe my senses are wrong, since this contradiction here is implying that. Hence skepticism, the idea that everything could be wrong. Even the contradiction could be wrong. But to use your reason, rationalize it, or not rationalize, reason through it. Don't rationalize through it. Don't do that. But reason.
To get back to the original point, though, that we were talking about, getting on that optical illusion thing was kind of off topic. But what I'm saying is that we already do put authority in our senses. And there is a possibility that our senses are entirely wrong. Like, just completely. There is no such thing as senses. Like, we are a brain in a vat. That is a possibility. And so as soon as someone says that I know that there isn't a God, you're automatically saying that I know for a fact that my senses exist and are correct, which is a huge assumption. And I would say that it's more likely that our senses are correct and that we actually are in this world and that a God doesn't exist. But I still have to admit that there is a small, tiny, 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 tiny possibility that my senses are incorrect, and that a God doesn't exist, or that a God exists and doesn't manifest in reality, in the deistic sense.
Let me say, though, it's just as big of an assumption to say that your senses aren't incorrect, because I would say that's probably more of an assumption, because in order to say that, you're assuming that there's some kind of world outside of your senses, to which your senses can be incorrect or correct. And to me, that's a far greater leap, because that's something you can, by definition, cannot experience. At least when, for example, a solipsist would agree with your first half when you say, I absolutely know my senses are correct, because there's nothing else.
I never said I absolutely know.
No, I'm saying that this is what a solipsist would say. A solipsist would absolutely say that their senses are correct, and therefore, if there's no God within their experience, there is no God, absolutely, for a fact,
There is a practical use from that, especially in science, that when you're exploring the completely unknown, rather than make assumptions about it and label it with those assumptions, use purely your senses and the tools that you have and poke at it, explore it, that sort of things, and purely define it by your results. Those results will ultimately change in the future as we gather more knowledge about it. But for now, that's the best guess or the best description you can have upon what it is. Like, for example, in quantum mechanics and particle physics, how we're poking and exploring, in a sense, particles is essentially just through our senses and what we have. And we try to define it really well through mathematics, because language fails a lot, and mathematics seems to be really great at describing these complex and almost abstract concepts. But hey, the softest way seems to work. Rely on your senses. What's there?
Let me throw something in here, because I think this perfectly comes back full circle to how we opened up with faith. And when I said I think there are actually things even atheists do believe based on no evidence whatsoever, I think this is one of the clearest cut examples. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing this. I forget what his name was. We were talking to one time. But I think that's a perfect illustration of a belief that even atheists have. That is purely faith. Faith in that really bad sense of, belief without any evidence whatsoever. Namely, the belief in some external world. Or to put it differently, the belief in something beyond what you can experience. It's impossible that there could be evidence for that, because by the very nature of such evidence, it would have to be experienced.
There doesn't have to be evidence of something for you to concede that there's a possibility that it exists, though, does there?
But wouldn't that,
of course, true.
Even if I conceded that, wouldn't that still fit the definition we were talking about earlier of faith being a belief without evidence?
Well, no. See, we don't assume that something's true because there's a small possibility that it's true. If there's a very small possibility that something's true, we assume that it's false. But when you're talking about something that's only verifiable after death, then you would have to say that there's only a small possibility that it's true, and I'm not going to believe that because that's, really, really, really small possibility. But
So what's the possibility that an external world exists? It's pretty damn small. I mean, what's our evidence for that?
I don't even know.
A world that exists beyond what you can experience.
I gotta make sure you both aren't just arguing what you both agree upon. So first off, David, if I understand correctly, you don't believe in external worlds?
Me?
Yeah.
I believe in external worlds.
As in supernatural?
Oh, no. I don't.
As in a world external
to
your
likely.
senses.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying now.
Wait, hold on.
I'm just trying to get an understanding of what you both are talking about. Okay, so Vit, at least, is talking about the idea that can you assume that the world around you, even though you might be perceiving it incorrectly, does in fact exist?
No.
Oh, okay.
The world around you is the world that you experience. That's what you quote unquote sense with your senses.
Mm-hmm.
That's the world
Agreed.
you experience. In other words, that's the only world, I would say, that you can possibly speak about as existing. What you just asked Devin is whether or not he believes that there's a world outside of his senses, outside of his experiences. And that's something I've already said by definition seems impossible to have evidence for, because the nature of such evidence would have to be experienced.
Oh, of course. You couldn't relate
So,
to it.
And by external world, just to clarify once more, an external world, I mean a world that is external, independent, outside of your experience.
Okay, the things that are going on in your brain right now, like the idea that there is some physical me, even if there wasn't, is still part of your experience, your phenomenological experience, if you are a brain in a vat. So it's not outside of your experience. Now, the world in which that brain in the vat is an external world in what sense you're talking about, and there's no evidence of that external world. But there is evidence that that something exists, and that's what me and Sweet Oblivion got to yesterday, a conclusion that something exists. It doesn't even have to be me, because me could be a part of a greater whole, but something does exist.
Oh, of course. That something is what you experience. But to say anything exists beyond that, like the brain in the vat, forget the brain in the vat. There's no reason to even talk. In other words, if you believe that there's a world outside of this, outside of your experience, it could well be a brain in the vat. The brain in the vat is not a problem for a solipsist. It's a problem for somebody who says that there's a world outside of your experience, because that outside world might as well be a brain in the vat.
If you are a brain in a vat, though, can you say that your senses are a correct way of understanding reality in the sense of the term that what is real? It's all an illusion if you're just a brain in the vat, and everything that we're postulating here is entirely incorrect and based on a false assumption that our senses are correct.
Again, correct or incorrect, if you're meaning those to mean whether or not what you experience corresponds to some outside world in a one-to-one kind of fashion, then I guess not. But even to a realist, in other words, a non-solipsist, who said, let's say a brain in the vat, even the brain in the vat is experiencing something. So in every sense of the word, what you're experiencing right now absolutely exists.
Yes. I'm not saying that.
Hold on, guys. I want to introduce Chris for a second. Hi, Chris. Introduce yourself.
Hey.
Awesome introduction. Okay, continue.
So just real quickly, the only thing in question here is that outside of experience. In other words, that brain in the vat, that outside external world. That's the only thing to be questioned. In both views, this is admitted as existing.
This is like exactly what you're saying. What you don't experience cannot possibly be true.
I'm saying it cannot possibly, well, I could say a couple things. One, it cannot possibly meaningfully be said to exist. There's no way to really ever not only know that, but ever verify it. And I would go so far as to say anything that even attempts to talk about that is really meaningless.
Hey, Devin, can you ask that question one more time to me? I kind of missed that.
I forgot what I asked. I said anything that you don't experience
doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. That's what he's saying. And what I'm saying...
Well, I'd like to intervene on there. When you start looking at like the quantum world, you start seeing where particles both have value and have no value. So something both exists and doesn't exist. So, I mean, you start running into problems whenever you start saying it doesn't exist.
Hey, Chris, can you sort of describe yourself? Explain who you are.
I have a master's in particle physics. I went to MIT. So I have a pretty good understanding of the quantum world. I study black holes. That's my...
I just want the audience to know, well, who's this guy? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, so continue. To your point.
So, I mean, when you start saying that we know what exists and what doesn't, when you start looking at the quantum world, you start realizing really quick that stuff has both value and no value. And that means it exists, but it doesn't exist at the same time, which means we don't know jack. We're both here and we're not here.
But strictly from a solipsistic point of view, the quantum world doesn't exist unless you're looking at it.
Yes.
Well, I was just using solipsism as an example of holding a useful trait.
I think the main point, though, that started us down this road is what I was saying is that there's an example. Unless you're a solipsist, you believe in something without any evidence, namely a world that exists beyond your senses.
Absolutely.
And so, and you admit though that that you have no evidence for that.
It's
whatsoever.
A baseless assumption.
Thank you. Okay, so
I would say though, even though it's a baseless assumption that my senses are correct, it is kind of like
useful?
A circular.
No. You're saying your senses aren't correct. You're saying that there's another world out there that.
No. I'm not saying. I'm saying that I don't know. In other words,
the solipsist says his senses are correct. To be clear.
Yes, and I'm not a solipsist, and I'm saying I don't know whether or not my senses are correct, but I assume my senses are correct because it has an operational value for this world, and without this assumption, it's like Occam's razor. It just makes more sense to say, and it's less assumptions to say.
It's less assumptions to be a solipsist. It's a less
Hold on.
assumption to say it doesn't exist than it does.
But you can
Before
never
we go
say
off
no.
on
You can
You
never
already
say
admitted-
no.
on the solves part.
Well, hold on.
Hold
Last point, I swear.
Okay.
You already admitted that it doesn't matter whether or not you are branding of that or not. So if it doesn't matter whatsoever, that's the definition of Occam's razor. Don't multiply variables or whatever beyond necessity. And you already admitted it doesn't matter. It's unnecessary.
Yeah, and I will say it's unnecessary, but I will say you are coming from the presupposition that all of your senses are correct without knowing for a fact that all of your senses are correct. It's like a circular argument. I know my senses are correct because my senses are telling me that my senses are correct.
Well,
And
actually, it's not as circular.
No.
It's not as circular sort of thing. And I wanted to. This is what I've been trying to say. Well, hold on, Chris. I've been trying to say this for like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Your senses is where you're starting everything, all your knowledge, experience, etc. When you start learning, you're using your senses, and you create relationships by these senses. So you see something's red, now it's red. You understand that. But we do know our senses are faulty. We also know our senses are limited. If someone were to ask me, how tall is that building in meters, I can't just look at it and say, oh, that's 4,000 meters tall or something. That's huge. But yeah, I would have to have ways to measure it and or even rely on other people who actually did the work. And they'll tell me, and then maybe they can verify it with me if I actually care or not. But that's one way I can aid my senses. Other ways to aid my senses is through comparison, like my illusion example. If you take it out of context and compare them side by side, you can use that new way of looking at it, a new angle upon that, to get a different perspective that might be clearer. And so you'll see a lot of illusions out there where people will show that what you think is a car is actually a poster, etc. We use our senses and assume they are all we can use to learn and derive experiences and stuff from. And outside of that, we don't assume they're absolute. We don't assume that what is in front of us is exactly what's there. We're going to put skepticism on that when necessary. If I see an apple in front of me and someone's laughing as I think, oh, I'm going to go grab that and eat it, and they're like, hey, you're going to regret that, I'm going to put a little skepticism on that and may find out the apple's made of plastic. So anyways, Chris, you want to say something?
I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Okay. So you can't just assume that it's circular reasoning that, oh, my senses are perfect because my senses are perfect. No. My senses are useful because, or I don't believe my senses are perfect, but I do believe they're useful. And I believe they're reliable because they have not let me down many times.
Well, look.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say.
It's superfluous to even say my senses are accurate, because that's already trying to refer to something outside of your senses. Assault says that your senses are all that there is.
Well,
at least that's all I can talk about. So there's no...
When you're defining accurate, I'm interested in what you're talking about, because
well,
I'm defining a little bit.
to call them accurate. It's meaningless to call them accurate for a solipsist.
When you go by, well, yeah, maybe by solipsism, but solipsism's pretty narrow.
I'm still stuck on that. So.
Oh, okay. I'm going more by my name, the pragmatic use of it. So, we have a goal in mind. The goal is, for some reason or another, I want to launch this rock into that castle over there and knock that wall down. I need it to be accurate. And so we'll do some experiments and studies and tests and develop equations and other notions that may help create predictable, tests that might create predictions that may lead to me hitting my target. And we can verify that by whether or not it hits my target when I use it. So, I mean, that's how you want to go by accurate. It's accurate because it works. And by how accurate depends on really how often it works. So,
I know.
To me, it seems like everything you're saying though is still completely going around.
It's more of a repeatable result.
yeah, that's the word.
So then I'm gonna have to ask questions. Wit, how do you know that your senses are all that exist?
Well, to say,
Well, that's a loaded question.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because your senses tell you that your senses are all that exist.
No.
So something could be outside of your senses that you don't know.
No, it's an assumption, but it's so you can learn. You have to have assumptions.
Well, we actually detach ourselves from our senses, guys. We do it all the time. Every time you go to sleep, you detach from your senses. You create a whole other world inside your head.
Oh, that's something you sense, though, is it not?
No, it's not really. I mean, you
by senses we mean experience. In other words,
Ooh, you got to clarify that because
your senses are
you still experience.
Your senses are your way to experience.
Okay, I'm going by the 5 senses: touch, smell, taste, hearing. Yeah.
And that right there, you can detach away from every time you go to sleep.
No,
to be
your
clear,
brain
though,
is still activated in the same spots. I mean, you can't say, oh, because I'm touching, then that's actually happening right here. It's happening up here. So when you're dreaming, it's still happening up here. You have the illusion that you're touching something, but it's still happening up here, just like it is when I'm.
Which is where you get the brain in the vat theorem from. Because we dream, you're kind of a brain in a vat when you're dreaming.
Yeah.
You're detaching yourself from the world around you.
Well, look, it's all part of consciousness. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Okay, it's all part of conscious experience, and so you can never detach yourself from conscious experience.
Well,
if you could, you wouldn't be able to consciously know about it to postulate that you did such.
Well, what's going on in your head when you're sleeping is a subconscious reality, and it's as real to you when you're dreaming as when you're awake.
Exactly. So there's no reason to call it subconscious or detached. It's just as real as when you're quote-unquote awake.
You're still feeling it in the moment, though.
But there are people that actually completely shut off when they're asleep, too. I mean, there are people that just don't dream.
Well, you're already assuming what we're trying to get to by saying that. I mean, if we're trying to get to that there is something beyond our conscious experience, you're already begging the question, saying, well, there are people who do this and that. I mean,
exactly.
You're still restricting and talking about what you consciously experience. You don't experience what other people experience. If there are other people at all.
You still haven't answered my question, though. It's still a huge
really
problem. How do you determine whether your conscious experience is correct?
And by correct, you mean
it's invalid.
Is an accurate view of reality. It accurately represents what reality is.
Reality.
Reality
is what you experience. They're one and the same.
Scientists never, ever assume that what they experience is absolute.
Exactly.
Wait, for the solipsists, though, Devin's asking. This is.
And that's actually inaccurate. We do. A lot of scientists, and even me in general, we make these assumptions that we are correct. And some of us in life will
this
stick
is what Devin's trying to ask.
Wrong. I mean, we don't. In the pure sense of it, we'd like to think that we have a bias, and we'd like to think that we can accept when we're wrong. But even the best of us cling to ideals that should have been thrown out long ago.
Well, look, Devin, the question you're trying to ask me, this is the way it sounds to a solipsist. How do you know that what you experience is what you experience? How do you know that experience is experience?
Well, the reason why I want to kind of get off the solipsism is this kind of getting...
Well, he asked me.
All right, yeah, we'll quit that. We're gonna argue forever.
Yeah, you would be, actually.
And the only reason I brought it up is to point out something that nearly everybody has faith in that doesn't have any evidence for.
Now, Martin Luther, I just want to mention this, because I think it might help a little. Martin Luther taught that faith and reason were antithetical. I got this from Wikipedia, which I thought was interesting. In the sense that questions of faith could not be illuminated by reason. He wrote, "All articles of our Christian faith, which God has revealed to us in His Word, are in presence of reason sheerly impossible, absurd, and false. And reason in no way contributes to faith, for reason is the greatest enemy that faith has. It never comes to the aid of spiritual things." I find that interesting because of the fact that so many times in debates among people's religious faith, the atheists are usually saying, can you provide physical or empirical evidence? And of course, the honest ones would say, no, I can't. Where the others are either they're being dishonest intentionally, or they define their faith completely different than the traditional sense, where God may not be as its tradition, or as God is traditionally stated as. Like, for example, miracles. When one asked what is a miracle, I think miracles can be best described as that which seems to go against the laws of nature that occurs.
Suspension of the physics of the world around.
Yeah. So, for example, if somehow a guy who weighs 500 tons started, for some unknown reasons,
500
walking
tons,
across
that's
the water,
1,000 pounds.
500 tons. Well, first off, we know that a guy who weighs 500 tons would die of a heart attack. But he's
Actually,
walking
500
on top
tons
of
is
water.
10,000 pounds.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how. Yeah, he's walking across the water. So now we have two things that we're suspending, the laws of physics with. It's like,
well, not necessarily. We have to look at it. Is he actually walking on the water, or is it an illusion?
Exactly.
We have like this angel who can actually walk on water, and he admits that it's an illusion.
And actually, that was where I was getting at. Exactly, Chris. The point is, okay, so
you have to start deductively ruling out what's actually happening there. Is it our mind playing tricks on us? Are we just not looking at it from the right angle? And that's actually, and then we take faith in the point that if we cannot find anything, then we want to step and say, there was nothing there for him to walk on. I tried to do it. I fell straight to the water, blah, blah, blah. And then you can come to the conclusion that he possibly is walking on water. And we still he might be suspended by wire, stuff like that, that we just aren't aware of.
Exactly. And this is where the God of the Gaps sort of comes in. It's like, okay, you have two options. A naturalist would say, well, what we're going to most likely do is one of two things. We're going to say that it is naturally caused, or that we just don't know what caused it, and we're going to continue to look for a reason for it. But we're never going to assume that something supernatural happens. Hence, a naturalist most likely, or should not ever believe in God because of that. Whereas to someone who's a theist, they're going to make the assumption, well, since we don't know what it is, God did it. Or
the example,
supernatural.
I give you an example of something that totally violates the laws of physics that we deal with right now, and I'm actually doing a lot of study into this. How galaxies form and what's going on with the galaxy. At the center of every galaxy, we have a black hole, and the rotation and spin of our galaxy it's 5 times faster on the outer rim than the inner rim. That should not be happening. We don't understand why. And
that's not what I've heard. Where are you getting that from?
From the actual data I've actually seen and looked at. There's 4 different case studies. Which one have you looked at?
It just sounds contrary to everything I've ever heard about galaxy rotation, that they all spin basically at the same speed in the center than they do on the outside, and that's the reason why they postulated dark matter.
It actually spins faster on the outer rim, actually a lot faster than it should. That's what our biggest problem is.
Faster than it should, meaning it spins at the same speed as the center.
No, actually it's spinning slower at the center than it should be.
Oh, well, no, both of those statements are mutually exclusive. According to relativity, the outside is spinning faster than it should be, meaning they're both spinning at the same rate. If relativity were true, those aren't incompatible statements. You see what I'm saying? If relativity were to hold on the scale of galaxies, the outside should be spinning slower than the center. And the fact that it's not means it's spinning faster than it should.
Yeah, you're right. I got it flipped. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was just okay.
I got it flipped around. The inside's actually spinning faster than the outside. You're right.
Well, no, they're spinning at the same rate.
No, they're actually not spinning at the same rate. They're actually spinning at different rates, and that's what's actually boggling how galaxies are forming.
Isn't that the whole reason why they postulated dark matter?
Why they postulated dark matter is because when they weigh any galaxy, the galaxy usually weighs more than it should be.
Yeah.
That's why dark matter came into play. And I'm actually working on the Higgs field right now and its interaction with the black hole to explain some of that. Sorry, kind of a little bit tired too. Haven't been sleeping much this week.
I forget how do we get on this topic though? Where is this going?
Yeah, I forgot where it was going. Sorry.
Okay. We were going into how a scientist views the world, basically, and that you were going into a contradiction to the properties of physics.
Instead of looking at it and saying, "Well, we don't understand what's going on there," and that's what we say. We don't understand what's going on there, and instead of equating it to God, we just say we don't understand yet, and then we start looking for the answers. That's what I was going at. Sorry.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily go and say it's God. He's slowing down the spin of the galaxy and he's interacting with it. We don't do that. We sit there and go, we don't understand it, and then we start looking for reasons why. We haven't found why, but we're trying to figure it out.
Well, I think me and Craig, we were talking about another direction we could go with this. I don't want to step on your toes there, Craig. One of the things we were talking about that we could discuss was perhaps maybe what, because I'm assuming we're all atheists here.
Yeah.
Right? So what if anything has been the best evidence, argument, reason, etc. that you've heard from the other side? The most, perhaps, the one thing that might give your atheism pause, if anything? Is there anything?
There's not very much, but I would say the idea that we were just talking about, the idea that there could possibly be something that's outside of our phenomenological experience, which you disagree with because there's no way to tell if something's outside of our experience because it would be outside of our experience so we wouldn't know it. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's the kind of Donald Rumsfeld, we don't know what we don't know. It's the unknown unknown. So
the best argument I ever had was simply a question. Do you know if there's or is not a God? And my answer was, I don't know. And right there...
Wait, you're not a strong atheist?
Oh, of course not. But I am a strong atheist because I hold the agnostic viewpoint. The idea that the word God is so poorly defined, if not undefined, that there's really nothing there, nothing of substance there that I can even use to analyze whether it exists or not.
For me, I think the best argument for whether there's a God or not, I probably came from one of my close friends. He's a chemist, and his argument is basically there's a possibility that there is a God for the simple fact that since the dawn of man, since modern man, not the biblical form of man, or since the dawn of man, man's had a need to search for something greater than themselves, and it's become an evolutionary trait of ours that we are searching for a God. And he says for him to discount that there is a God is kind of foolish. But he says it's even more foolish to start giving values to that God. Who are we to dictate what God can and can't do? The second you give God a value like he created the universe, you can shoot that down. But whenever you take that, when you stop putting values on God, then you start understanding that you really don't know God. That was probably the best argument I've had, is if there is one, you're not going to know anything about him. We cannot put a value on him. That's probably the best argument I've had. And he doesn't put a value on God. He believes in God. But if you ask him to define his God, he's going to tell you he cannot.
That seems so weird.
I know, but
how can you believe in something you can't define? But yeah,
he believes that there's something out there greater than us. What it is, he has no clue.
I was curious, does he believe that something might hold interest in us?
No.
If that would be a
He
good
says
term.
he doesn't know. He would say he would know.
Okay.
I mean, that's probably the best argument I've heard to date, is that there is a longing in all of us. I mean, we wouldn't be discussing this if there wasn't, at some point in your life, you had a longing for that. We all eventually started making logical conclusions. And it's very prominent throughout history that religion's there. I honestly don't agree with him. I actually don't think that there's a God. And if there is, it's a very low probability that there is. And even he'll say that it's a low probability, but he likes to think that there is. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know if he wouldn't know if he's interested or not. He has no value of that God.
Yeah, I wish we could have a theist on, because if we could have a theist on, I'd ask them, what's the biggest problem for your theism? But maybe I could ask conversely, is there like one, or what's like the strongest one thing that really kind of convinced you that there is no God, or to at least not believe in one?
And for me, I read the Bible. I thought it was the biggest joke I've ever read.
Were you a theist until then, or?
No, I was.
Were you ever a theist?
No, my parents were Baptists, and we went to church, but church was just basically we went and played with blocks, and every once in a while they told us a story, and I'd look at the lady like, oh, cool, like a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of story. But then I realized that she was getting it from a book, and I didn't realize that they were taking this book for literal sense. And I decided to sit down and read it, and I was like, this is the biggest load of crap I've ever read. And they actually believe this is true, and I actually lost a lot of respect for my parents.
Oh, wow.
After reading that. And it's probably why they shuffled me off to college at such a young age, because I honestly thought my parents were absolutely retarded for believing in it.
So they thought by sending you to college it would... What?
No, they sent me to college because it just caused a lot of arguments. And instead of arguing with me, they just sent me off to college, so they didn't have to deal with me.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it's like even a question, something so monumental, something so, supposedly, if it were true, something so fundamental to the core of everything, our being, the creation, everything, something that so fundamental like that should even be in question, really, to me, seems pretty indicative that there's a reason for that. And the reason is because it's just...
And like I said, I think it's an evolutionary trait that was used to bring us together, is what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if God, especially the God described in the Bible, if that were true, even slightly, it would be so incredibly apparent. It would be so obvious. Like, it wouldn't even be a question. The fact that there's even debates and people talking about the existence... I mean, how many things do we actually debate about the existence of, I mean, besides, like, cosmological kind of bodies, like, really not much, I mean, it's pretty self-evident if something exists or not.
We debate a lot of stuff in my field, but something like that, I mean, the common person, that's something the common person can debate.
Now, one thing I just thought about, the way you guys were putting it, the idea that it's something that brings us all together, brings up this idea, the idea that, which obviously isn't my own, but the idea that God is sort of the answer to that question, what is the purpose here? Or what am I supposed to do? Why am I here? And so with that, you could say that God is, in a sense, I know this is the claim, and that would be fun for YouTube discussion, whatever. God is that goal we are striving for, whatever it is.
See, and I kind of tend to think of it as more of a sociological glue. It puts it gives a group of people a commonality that they can socialize with and help each other. That's kind of what I look at it as.
Well, religious gods in that aspect could be that, in the sense that we all decided to focus our goals on something particular. In the Christian case, heaven. In the Buddha's case, samsara, and so forth. You could say that, in a sense, that is God, or the.
And I think religion really brought about not morals in the sense it brought about the discussion of why we don't go around killing each other, why it's not okay to steal. It brought that up, and then they started attributing that to their gods. And I actually kind of look at, whenever I see theists arguing, then why don't you have morals? Well, or where do your morals come from? Well, it's an evolutionary trait. It definitely is an evolutionary trait. It's not healthy for a society that goes around killing each other. Your social organization will die out if you're going around killing everybody. You cause mistrust when you go around stealing. I mean, that's what our morals are. It keeps us from crippling ourselves and keeps us from having a better chance of succeeding and propagating our genes. It's an evolutionary trait.
Mm-hmm.
And so morals aren't necessarily a religious piece. Of course. It's more of a evolutionary piece that we turned into. It's because of religion that you have that. And it kind of frustrates me every time I see somebody, theists, say, well, where do your morals come from? The same place theirs does. Only difference is I don't attach mine to a god. It's in my benefit to not go around killing people, because it makes me pretty much a target for the rest of the people in my social circle. They're not going to trust me. They'll probably try to lock me up, or I'll be shunned.
Well, what if you could get away with it?
Well, we're not going to go into the topic of morals.
Okay.
We did that last show.
Yeah. So when you start attributing our normal things that we do on a regular basis, when you're religious, I think you try to put everything in that context. And most of it doesn't really even fit in that context. It usually fits in something natural.
Yeah. For me... Oh, were you going to say something, Prag?
No, I was about to ask you, but no, you're about to answer it.
I was going to kind of address... I was trying to think of the answer to my own question earlier. I think what the most, mystical thing to me, really, is this... just the sheer... And I think Wittgenstein himself, no less, kind of is infamous for posing it this way, is that, and he said something like, the mystery isn't how the world exists, it's that it exists. And it is, I find myself pretty often thinking about the sheer fact that it either, existence itself, whether or not there's a God, either, it's just mind-boggling to try to consider how it all came about. It seems like there's really only two options. It's either infinite or it's not. If it's not infinite, it's spontaneously just pops into being, which is unfathomable. If it's an infinite regress, that existence just eternally...
Wouldn't necessarily say it popped into existence.
Well, just using the law of excluded middle. It's either eternal or it's not. It's And both options are completely unfathomable to me. It seems to me, logically, really, there ought to be nothing whatsoever. Even if God is part of this existence, there shouldn't be anything. How anything came to be, God or not, is really insane to me.
And that's because we have the perspective problem.
Perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's just... It seems to me the eternal question that could never possibly be answered. And God is in no way an answer at all, because you still have to ask, why does that exist? The question is why. Why does that exist?
Rather than what nothing. Is it? Yeah.
And people will often say, well, God is the reason that something exists rather than nothing. But you can still ask, well, why does God exist rather than nothing? It's still God doesn't have to exist.
And God's not something. He's nothing.
Apparently, yeah. He's not made of anything. He doesn't reside anywhere. He doesn't exist at any point in time. So, it sounds like nothing.
No, he exists at all points of times.
Oh, well, depending on who's apologizing for him, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apologizing.
No, but I mean, I don't know. That, to me, is... I can never wrap my head even around existence itself and where the fuck it all came from. I mean, God is not an answer, but it is a very mystical question to me.
And even if you trace all the evidence back, it all points to a Big Bang, and then you have to sit there and wonder what triggered it.
Yeah.
And we have some guesses of what triggered it, but they're just guesses.
Yeah, they're no different than just saying God did it.
But whatever triggered it, you can ask the question infinitely. You can always ask the question. Whether or not you want to... There is no possible terminator for it. There's no... God doesn't do the trick, I'm sorry. But you can always ask, why does that exist?
Bring up that point to the viewers, because I thought that was really, really interesting. I had never thought of myself yesterday. The two terrible alternatives, infinite regress or nothing, or something came from nothing.
Just spontaneous immersion or something.
Yeah. Explain that to the viewers.
He just did.
Well, it's just either existence goes back infinitely forever, just always being there, or it's somehow magically just popped into being.
So steady state model or the Big Bang model.
No, I'm talking about existence itself, though. I mean, which maybe.
That's how I would equate it down to a steady state model or the Big Bang model.
Well, I wouldn't equate the Big Bang to something that began.
Essentially, what he's saying is he's equivocating it to either the eternal model or the came from nothing model. And those are the two models that he knows of. There's probably other ideas people can come up with. Some absurd, some not so much. But I'm just trying to clarify that. So continue it.
Oh, no, that was it. Yeah.
Now, what drove you away from faith? Because I understand that you used to believe.
Are you asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I used to be a young Earth creationist and the whole 9 yards, and that's Devin. I know. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it was just. You know what I think it was? I think it was ultimately the fear. Just the idea, right, of hell, that, everybody kind of already acknowledges that at any second, everyone acknowledges how ephemeral life is, how instantly it could all end at any moment for some freak accident. And to compound that with the idea that, okay, you're going to be judged when you die, and you could possibly go to this place where you are in the worst possible pain forever. I mean, so taken together, that means at any possible second, I could instantly be thrown into eternal suffering. It's the most crippling, scary idea imaginable. And what wouldn't you do, to try to avoid that? And so I think once I could finally get over that fear and just allow myself to really consider just the question, even asking the question seems so blasphemous to me that I think once I got over that, it was fairly straightforward.
With me, I've already said the argument that I found was strongest, but the argument drove me away from my faith, because I, like you, was a young Earth creationist. Was simply doing what the Bible told me not to do. I tested God, and did it multiple times, and God failed all the tests. Whether it was intentional or not, it's irrelevant to me. To me it was, well, if there's no consequences here, why am I considering these assumptions? Now, this didn't drive me away completely, but it began my slow escalation down towards, hey, why do I even care? I have no reason to believe in God, and it's better to assume he's not, so that, I'm not lying to everybody. Why lie and say, oh, I believe in God, when ultimately I don't? Let's be honest with me. And so, from there, it came from that, and I started studying, apologetics and theology during my doubtful stages. And I realized that even apologetics and theology couldn't answer the experiences I had. So it was like, you know what? This is bullshit. Okay.
Let me ask. Oh, sorry.
Well, because, we have our rituals. We go to Mass at least once a week. Or church. I went to Mass. And, to pray, to repent, and to confess your sins, all these actions, I just essentially was like, well, there's better ways of going about it. And so I just discarded it all. I was like, why waste my time with that? Let's go figure out better means to do this, and let's challenge it all. Let's have fun and challenge everything from here on out. And it failed all the challenges, and I walked away. So.
Did you say there was an initial fear, though, at all?
Oh, correct? Of course.
What got you over the fear, though?
The fear?
To even question it.
I'm theorizing, because my memory's really sketchy, that maybe I accidentally put a test to God. And, by God failing that test, it struck me as, oh, nothing bad happened. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think real quick, just to add on to what I was saying, I think one of the best arguments, not a formalized argument, but the idea that really got me over the fear was reasoning out to myself that, if God really does exist, and if he actually is perfectly good, if he's God and he's good, I think I'm pretty good, and he ought to be infinitely better than me being a God, right? So it just, that alone seems utterly incompatible with the idea of hell. The idea of hell is such an evil concept to me that no good God, even remotely good God, could logically send me to hell for what? Asking a question? I think that's what finally did it for me. He won't mind me checking it out.
Well, actually, we have an 8-minute warning, so I'm actually going to start the ending statements. But
well, let Chris say something, and then we'll.
Yeah, I was going to say sorry for cutting you off, Chris, but
well, it's whenever I was talking to the pastor and stuff, I asked him to define what his God was, and then looking at where he got his faith from, which is the Bible, which I couldn't see how anybody could get a faith from the Bible, and come out with a God that's moral, because it's just that God is so vindictive and so apparently evil compared to my standards of what good is. And I was 9 at the time, and my standards of good was I didn't hurt my brothers and sisters. That to me was just like, are you serious?
Yeah. No harm. Why is there foul?
And why are people dying? Why are there poor people? If God really cared about us, wouldn't he be like my mother, who made sure I ate every day, took a bath every day, freaking yelled at me if I did something stupid? He's not that much of a protector. And he can't care about me if he's not down here showing himself to me. I didn't even know God existed until I started reading the Bible, and actually was like, oh, wow, what do you mean that's what you believe? And then I said, because I remember talking to my my cousin about some story about David and Goliath, and I thought how I was trying to give her the moral of it, and she's like, "No, it's real," and I was like, "No, it's not real," and she goes, "Yeah, it's real." And then I went and talked to my mom about it, and she's like, "Well, yeah, it's a true story," and I'm like, "What? No way!" And then I started reading it and saw all the horrors that God did in the Bible. I was like, "Oh my God, are you serious?"
Yeah. Well,
So
closing statements. Sorry, Chris, I cut you off. Okay.
No, go ahead and wrap up. That's what I said.
Yeah, what's your closing statement there, Chris?
My closing statement is faith is a perspective, and it's completely subjective to the person. I mean, that's what faith is. Everybody has a different opinion of what faith is. Me, I do have faith that the scientific method works because I've seen it repetitively. It's something, I have trust in it because I've used it. I don't put much faith in what other people say unless I go and research it myself.
And Vit, closing statement?
The only thing I would say is I'd like to close with Galileo, who said, "I do not feel obligated to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use." So that just a recap on what I was just saying. So
Nice, good.
it's a good way to say it.
And to me, faith is important to understand in people because it in itself will tell you more about them. I believe that faith is, in essence, a huge clue to what drives and motivates that person to do the things they do. And rather than just, saying, "Oh, you're a fool because you believe in God," it'd be better to ask some questions on why they believe in God and what expectations are they having from believing this, and so forth. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up our show. So we're keeping it short for now on because of the previous show. We suggested that limiting it to about an hour and a half is sufficient. So no longer are we going to try to have 3-hour shows. So, all right. Peace out, everyone.
Take it easy.